Isaiah 43, verses 1 and 2. It's up on the screen behind me, but it's also on page 718 in the Bible that's in the pew there. But it's a different version. If you want to follow along, a little different version. Please pray with me. God, we thank you for the prophets that have come in the past. We thank you for their words of hope, for their words of warning, for their words of help. We ask that you can help us to understand and use those words today. In Jesus' name, amen. This is titled Restoration and Protection Promise. But now, thus says the Lord, He who created you, O Jacob, He who formed you, O Israel, do not fear, for I have redeemed you. I have called you by name. You are mine. When you pass through the waters, I will be with you, and through the rivers, they shall not overwhelm you. When you walk through the fire, you shall not be burned, and the flame shall not consume you. The word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God. I want to thank Armando and Fred for minute permission and scripture reading. Armando, you could be a preacher, you know. You get up here, if folks say you have minute permission, and then you take that extra step, man. You are well prepared. And then you gave away the secret of men, right? There's a bunch of guys up here, but we are so dependent upon women in our life. We don't even have breakfast. We just have donuts or something easy at the men's Bible study. But anyway, we really do need you. You ever have worry in your life? Maybe you're worrying about work, or your kids, or your health. Jesus has something to say to you. Let's hear that as our gospel reading comes from Luke chapter 12, verses 23 to 26. Listen for God's word speaking to those of you that find yourself worrying. Jesus said to his disciples, "Therefore I tell you, do not worry about your life, what you will eat, or about your body, what you will wear. For life is more than food, and the body is more than clothing. Consider the ravens, they neither sow nor reap. They have neither storehouse nor barn, and yet God feeds them. And of how much value are you than the birds? And can any of you, by worrying, add a single hour to your span of life? If then you are not able to do so small a thing as that, why do you worry about the rest?" Lord, we hear you, but this is hard. Sisters and brothers, this is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Friends, we continue our Covenant Love series today, where we interview folks where they tell us about experiencing God's covenant love in their life. And our topic today is where we experience God's covenant love when death is looking you in the eyes. So I am thrilled for you to hear the story of our friend Chris Bounds. Would you welcome him up and give praise to God? Chris was the chair of the pastor nominating committee that brought me here to Boise. So if you don't like me, blame Chris. But if you do like me, just say, "We like you, Kevin." You don't have to talk. Many of you know Chris. He's been around Covenant for how many years have you been here?
About 18, I think.
18 years. So a lot of us know you, but not all of us know Chris. Before we get to the heart of your story, just tell us a little bit about yourself and your family.
Okay. Well, I'm going to go back very quickly. I was born in Alabama, so I speak with a southern Idahoan accent. I have 3 sisters, including a twin sister. my mother was a teacher and a professor, and my dad traveled almost all the time, like 5 days a week. So we were principally raised by in the South by what people refer to as a maid, but she was really a maid slash nanny. She died when I was 10 years old.
We'll move on.
At 16, my parents, we lived in Texas at the time, were divorced. And my mother loaded us all in the car, actually 2 cars. We pulled a horse trailer and 2 dogs, and we all came to Idaho, where Mom took a position in Boise State. And she was there till she retired. I left Idaho. I got there my junior year, had to make new friends and all that. But I left and went back to Texas on a track scholarship, and then after that went to the Bay Area to graduate school. A little bit about my family, or how my family got started. When I was in my first year of graduate school, we had an opportunity to go to Hawaii with my extended family for a big family reunion. And while I was there, I had met a girl at Stanford that year who was going to be there for spring break also. So I found her and I took her out on a date. And then when I took her home, I met one of the women that was sharing the room with her, who was there as part of a big group. And I realized I had taken out the wrong girl. And this girl's name was Carol. So the next night, I took Carol out. And before the end of that evening, I knew in my heart I was going to marry her. I know it sounds weird, but I did. And she was due to leave. Right after I met her, within a day or so, and I couldn't stand that. So talked to my mom, and we invited her and her roommate from Stanford, a woman named Ann Gust, who is now Ann Gus Brown, who was the First Lady of California for 10 years or 8 years, something like that. They just finished their term. Anyway, that's an aside. But so I invited Ann Gust and Carol to come sleep on the floor of my grandparents' condo, and they did. And after several more days, we went back to Stanford together. And 9 months later, we were married. And we now have 4 children, excuse me. And
I'm glad Carol is not here.
And Carol is currently in San Diego with our oldest, who just had her second baby. So we have 2 grandchildren.
That's awesome. How old is Cameron?
He is about 2 weeks old now.
Yay.
Yes.
As I've been here over the past 2 years, Chris, it's been fun to get to know you and your darling wife, and I've met your 4 kids, and Maya, and I look forward to meeting Cameron soon. Your family is a blessing to our church. Before we get into the depth of your story, where you tell us where death is looking you in the eye, can you tell us a little bit about your faith formation over your life, what Jesus has meant to you?
Sure. Well, I was raised a Christian. We went to church every Sunday. I actually found it meaningful. It was an Episcopalian church, very formal, but still moved me. When I went to college, I recommitted myself to Jesus Christ, probably for the first time as an adult, and I joined a Bible study. And then after that, I went on to graduate school and met Carol and married her, and she was a very faithful Christian as well. So over the years, we've been able to encourage each other in our faith. As far as, there have been several occasions after many years of preparation doing business stuff that I think God called me to do something with my skill set that involved mission. And those have probably been the most meaningful and spiritually awakening events in my life. I think some of you know I've been to Ethiopia multiple times and Papua New Guinea and some really strange places. Demolash, I was so excited to hear that he and Kevin made contact. I met Demolash in Ethiopia and invited him to consider being our sister church, and to know that you two have now connected is amazing. Demolash is about Kevin's age. He is the black version of Kevin. He is enthusiastic, he is outgoing, he is loved by his congregation. Their church is much larger than ours, and they have like 8 or 10 satellite churches that meet in huts, basically, but it's a wonderful connection for us to have, and to know they're praying for us is an amazing thing.
Yeah, I feel like the African church, even though they may not have a lot of resources, their prayers are powerful. So if they can send their prayers our way, we are blessed.
So Chris, it was 9 years ago. You're 53 at this time in life.
Right.
And I think at the age of 53, Chris Bounds is running like 6-minute miles, which is insane. Even, I don't want to do the math, but in your 60s, you're still one of the healthiest guys that I know. But you had an event that took place in your driveway where death began to look you in the eye. Can you tell us a little bit about that day and the next few days?
Sure. Well, it was March of 2010. It's a beautiful day, early, it was a spring, one of these great days we have this time of year. And I had just finished a 4-mile run, which was a regular thing for me, nothing out of the ordinary. And I was in my driveway working on a piece of furniture. I build furniture, I was sanding it. And I felt a sensation in my neck, and then I got very dizzy and nauseous, just like that. It was just so fast. And so I thought I was going to throw up, so I walked over to the grass, and then there I fell down, and I couldn't get up, and the world was spinning. I mean, I was just completely disoriented, and my dog came over and started licking me. I think the dog knew something was really serious, even though I didn't, that no, it was really serious. After 5 or 6 minutes, I was able to get up, and I wandered back inside, and I told my son, well, something really strange just happened to me. I think it was vertigo or something. And that's what I thought, because I was so healthy. I could go out and run a half marathon in, an hour and 30 minutes. I was doing that at that time, so I just couldn't think it was something serious. So I just took it easy that day, and that evening I stood up again after dinner. We were watching TV, and the world started spinning again. And I said to Carol, you better take me to the hospital. So we went down to the little hospital in Eagle that St. Al's has, because it was the closest. And they put me in right away, and the doctor there was a brand new doctor, a very young guy, and he was very earnest. He tried very hard, but he didn't know what was going on. And I wasn't helping, because I kept saying, I just had a vertigo spell, I want to go home. And but I stayed. And after many hours, they finally got a scan of my brain, sent it to the main hospital, and I was having a massive stroke. And didn't know it. And at that point, I had lost, my speech was very slurred. And, I think what got the doctor really excited, he picked up my left arm and it just fell. I couldn't move my left arm, and I don't think I could really move my left leg either. So they put me in an ambulance and rushed me over to the main hospital. And it was in the ambulance, Carol got very frightened because this was getting really serious and my condition was just going downhill in a hurry. So we got to the main hospital, we were met by a neurologist. And it turns out St. Al's, if you ever have a stroke, go there. And the reason is they're the only certified stroke center in Idaho. And that's just one thing they do that no one else in Idaho does. So this neurologist, met us, and I was in terrible shape, could barely talk, couldn't really move, and they put me on a gurney and wheeled me in, and this neurologist starts talking to us and says, look, you're having this stroke, it's in this area of your brain, they call this the widowmaker, and you're gonna die. Unless we do something, it's gonna kill you. Well, it had been too late they have drugs they can use on your brain or clots to break them up, but they have to be administered within just a few hours of the onset of the stroke, so it was too late for that. In fact, it was too late to do anything. But the doctor decided to bend the rules, and she said, look, we have this procedure, we haven't done it very often, but we have a doctor here. There were actually 2 doctors in the state of Idaho that have ever done this, and they're both at St. Al's. And what they did is, she says, we can put this wire with a little grabber on the end through your groin, thread it up through your body, through your heart, up through your neck, into your brain, and we could try to grab the clot and pull it out. And then she said, well, this is very, very dangerous. It's very dangerous. And I slurred to her, well, what would you do? And she says, I'd do the procedure. So my right hand was all at work then. I gave her a thumbs up, and they started prepping me to go into this surgery. So as they're wheeling me in, Carol's there. And I guess for the first time I realized that I might not come out of this. You know, there was a good chance I wasn't gonna ever leave that room. And I said goodbye to Carol. And we both cried. So they wheeled me in.
Chris, can I ask a few questions?
Yeah.
So they bend the rules for this risky procedure. If you don't have the procedure, you're going to die.
Right.
Do you remember like the success rate of this procedure?
So late.
I have no idea. I really don't. They'd only done it a few times.
Okay.
So let's say 50-50.
I would say way less than that, from what she said. You know,
Yeah.
This was just a hope and a prayer. And by that time, my family had mobilized, and all my relatives were coming to the hospital, and they were gathered. And word had gotten to the church. It was now Sunday morning. This happened. My first falling down was Saturday morning. Then I went in Saturday evening when I got dizzy again, and so now it's 12 hours later. And so the church was praying for me. And so I go into this room, and it's just full of equipment. They have to image your whole body while they're doing this, so they know all the twists and turns to take to get this thing into your brain. And they kept me awake. And I guess they do that because they can go right through an artery and rupture it, and they want to know if they've killed you, I guess. So I'm there, you know, not very with it, but I am aware. And after quite some time, the doctors and all the people in the room, all these radiologists and people, start jumping up and down and high-fiving, and they're very excited. And they'd gotten the clot and pulled it out. And then they ran that wire back up again with a little thing that has something called TPA on it, which is a clot buster, and kind of washed out the area. And then they took me out of the room. And, you know, my body started responding very quickly. I started having feeling again. At that point, I couldn't move anything. I couldn't talk, but I started having feeling again, and regaining some movement. And as they wheeled me out, I remember my left hand hadn't worked for 8 hours at that point, but I remember raising my left arm and giving Carol a thumbs up, and they took me away to the intensive care recovery. And I was there about a day, and
Can I ask another question?
yeah.
So your brain had had a deficiency of blood for about 24 hours.
Right.
Anyone expects some impairment.
Yeah, I skipped over that part, but when they took me in that room, and Carol and I had said goodbye, the neurosurgeon got back with Carol and said, you know, we've seen it on the scans, he has extensive brain damage, and his recovery, if he lives, is very uncertain, and it's gonna be a long time, he's likely gonna be in a wheelchair, he's gonna have all kinds of issues. So that's what the doctor had told Carol. So we're in this recovery room, and they say about 24 hours, you know, after I went in there, they're ready to move me into a regular hospital room. And I insisted on, I said, it was another floor away, I said, I want to walk. And they said, you can't walk. I said, I want to walk. And so they went and got a bunch of people to catch me when I fell down. And I got up and I walked to the next room, or this other hotel or hospital. So hotels, that's fun.
Hotel St. Alphonsus.
Yeah.
Some of you have stayed there, right?
Yeah. So I was there about another 3 days, and mostly because they were doing all these tests, trying to figure out why someone, you know, as young as I at the time and as healthy had had a stroke. And they couldn't find anything. You know, I had a very healthy cardiovascular system, no blood clotting issues, no nothing. They never were able to determine why it happened. But I got to go home after 3 days, and I continued to make rapid improvement. And 10 days after the day of the stroke, I ran a 5K race with my doctor's approval. I didn't just go do it. You know, I've had a couple issues, minor issues lingering, but one could be dealt with physical therapy, and the other I just live with. You know, when I write things now, emails, whatever, I will, you know, make really simple errors. I can still write, still conceive, but, you know, I'll not put a space between two words, or I'll repeat a word twice, or I'll misspell something and not see it. And I could read that thing 5 times and I don't see the errors. And if I read it the next day, I see them. So I just learned to, okay, read it backwards, do something to try to see stuff. And so I still deal with that, but that's probably about the only thing.
Chris tells me about his impairments from his strokes that he lives with today, and I'm like, I do that every day of my life, and I haven't had it. This is miraculous in many ways. And my guess is that many of us have heard Chris allude to God's presence in this. But Chris, why don't you give witness to us? Where did you experience God's covenant love as you went through this ordeal?
Well, when something like this happens, you know, I think a natural reaction to ask, why did this happen? You know, and that's an unanswerable question, you know. Because bad stuff happens to people. It just does. And everyone who's lived any years at all knows that. So if something bad happened to me, we can ask, well, did God allow that? Or, you know, there's no answer to that question. But what I do know is that God healed me. And God allowed me to recover fully and to continue to function. And I can only surmise that God still has things He wants me to do that require the full use of my body. Because, you know, you can serve God from a wheelchair. A lot of people do. But I think He has something for me to do. You know, and maybe it was my most recent trip to Ethiopia to get the electrification of southeastern Ethiopia going. Because you couldn't do that in a wheelchair. I don't know, or maybe it's something still to come, but I stand ready to do whatever it is because, you know, I am His. And I'll talk more about that later.
As we come to a time of conclusion, Chris, what should we learn from your experience where you're facing death in the eye and God says, nope, we've got more work for you to do, Chris. What should we learn from your experience?
I had a chance to visit with John Gillespie this morning, and he knows what I'm about to tell you too. We are not in control of our lives. And every day on this earth is a gift from God. And most of us understand that intellectually, but we don't really understand that. You know, we all think, well, someday I'll die. But unless you're very old or unless you're very sick, someday seems very uncertain and far off. But I can tell you, I was one of the healthiest 53-year-olds on the planet, in just terms of fitness level, and within 24 hours, I was looking death in the face. And you just don't know what's coming in your life. I don't think people should go around, you know, worrying about it, but I do think you should live every day to its fullest. And that's one thing that I've learned. You know, that Isaiah passage says God has summoned us by name, and He's called us, and then it says, and we are His. And that's a very personal statement, because He says He summons us by name. So He knows each one of us individually, and we are His. If you think you're in control, I tell you it's an illusion. It's just not true. So you really need to live your life fully. And I think related to that, if you're really not in control, then you really should not go through life fearful, particularly fearful of anything that God calls you to do. You know, when God calls me to go to Ethiopia, I'm going into Muslim areas that are very hostile, and I've been surrounded by people with weapons, and I've had lots of things happen. There's lots of reasons to be afraid, but I won't say in that moment I'm not afraid, but I'm not afraid to go because God has ordained, you know, the last hour and day of your life. And if He's calling you to do something, you need to go do it. And He's going to protect you, and He's going to take care of you. So that's, I guess, the other thing I learned. That doesn't mean go do foolish things. I'm talking about things God calls you to do, and maybe they're dangerous or they're scary to you, but if He calls you to do something, go do it.
Chris, anything else that we should know? You have the floor. Not many people have the floor.
No, I don't think so. This is Carol and I in Hawaii on that same beach where we met almost 40 years ago. And some of you guys know we go to Hawaii now, try to go for a few months every winter. We bought a place in the same place where I met her.
I look forward. When does Carol come back? We're all looking forward to Carol coming back.
April 1.
April 1, all right. It's fascinating for me to consider Chris's story. I have a very good friend back in West Virginia, similar story. 40-year-old high-powered attorney. Everyone in small town Elkins would say, I'll use his name, Bill. Bill was the best attorney. And he would say, I was womanizing, I was living in the money, and very similar, bam, has a stroke. Very different outcome. Bill tells the story, he's laying in the hospital bed, saying, if you will let me live, God, I will be at church every Sunday. God allowed Bill to live. With significant physical impairment. But Bill is in church every Sunday. He may cuss me out on the way because he's one of my good friends. Like in a loving, joking, friendly West Virginia redneck manner. He's still learning what it's like for these fruits of the spirits, but he felt that God saved his life, and he walks in with his cane every Sunday. What do we make of this? There was a church praying for Chris. Chris makes a full recovery. He's functioning better than a 38-year-old does without a stroke, right? Then there's Bill, and then there's your life, right? With your hardships infirmities, etc. We love to know, God, why are you doing this to me? Job is asking the question over and over in the book of Job. Why are you doing this? David in the Psalms cries out, why? How much longer, God? Why have you forsaken me? Is it God's fault? Is it my fault that I had this stroke? We love to attach blame and meaning, right? I don't believe, and Chris may disagree, and that's okay, but I don't believe that God said, I'm going to smite you with a stroke today to teach you a lesson. I don't believe in that God. But what do we do with these instances where blood clots form in our brain and we're left impaired? Or this person at work I just can't get along with, or my finances just aren't working out. God, where are you? Is this my fault? What have I done? We like to attach blame. And I don't know that we get to attach blame for any of this, right? There's the story that shows up in John's Gospel. They encounter a man born blind, Jesus and the disciples, and those disciples trying to figure life out. Jesus, Rabbi Jesus, whose fault is it that this man is blind? Is it his parents' fault, or is it his fault? And you know what Jesus says? Jesus doesn't say it's anybody's fault. He merely says this man was born blind so that God's glory may be revealed. Not that Jesus is promoting blindness, but insinuating, teaching that God can be at work when we're born blind, when we encounter the stroke, when we have the cancer diagnosis, when we go through the financial hardship. If we believe that God is with us, we can confess with Paul that God will work for the good of all those who love God and have been called by God. So whatever it is you're going through right now, whether you're looking death in the eye, or whether you have some other thing that you're worrying about that Jesus says, don't worry about. Let us believe that God can take this hardship and use it to bring glory. And in Chris's case, it's bringing light to Ethiopia. He's actually working to bring light to the sanctuary too. But God is using Chris, and God is going to use you too through whatever hardship you're going through. Stop trying to blame yourself or God or someone else. May we simply allow God to reveal his glory in whatever hardship. Because that's the Christian story, right? God takes death on a cross and uses it for the salvation of the whole world. Friends, why don't we all allow God to use our strokes, our cancer, our relation hardships to teach us, to teach others what God can do for the glory of those who believe. Let's pray. God, thank you for our brother Chris, who you have brought to us this day to share his story of your covenant love, to inspire all of us that even when death looks us in the eye, we need not be afraid because you have saved us. And if you allow us to live, to use this gift of breath which we inhale now, you have called us to your work. So Lord, help us not to be afraid or to live fearfully or to worry, because you have called us to your good works. And we trust that you will call us home at the right time. And in that we need not fear, but to have this great hope that we have in our Lord Jesus Christ. Amen. Amen.